Be Frank Network. Content on this production is for entertainment and informational purposes only. It is not medical advice, nor is it intended to substitute medical treatment or diagnosis. Seek medical help if you believe that you are suffering from a mental illness or are a threat to yourself or others. By using any or all of the information provided, you do so at your own risk. Any application of the material is at the listener's discretion and is his or her sole responsibility.
Everybody, Doc Brian here, and welcome to Doc Talks DX on Patreon. We're thankful that you have joined us here today. Hopefully you have been listening to Doc Talks on all of the streaming platforms and have listened to the interview that we had with Robin Foutz and the remarkable story of her son, Elisha. And she is back here with us today on Doc Talks DX. So Robin, once again, we thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it has been a heart-wrenching story. I don't think I've ever cried on a podcast before, but there's a first time for everything. So if you've listened to that first part, you know that her son, Elisha, was he 7 years old, did you say, when this took place?
Oh, he had just turned 12.
Okay, so just turned 12 when he was struck by a vehicle, had a traumatic brain injury with several strokes, and they were unsure for a while what the outcome was going to be. In talking about this, there, of course, within a diagnosis of this kind of trauma, one of the most common, I guess, aspects that we would assign to it would be a post-traumatic stress disorder. Sometimes post-traumatic stress is just that, post-traumatic stress, that it isn't necessarily a disorder, because it's not reoccurring. Have you suffered from any type of post-traumatic stress within this?
I would say there maybe a couple times. It's just situational. Mm-hmm. I guess if I'm really down, it's been like a really hard day. Work's been challenging. The kids have been challenging, and then I look at, couldn't this be easier? Mm-hmm. And I've had breakdowns from that. I would say, I know that my oldest son, who was with Elisha, he has been diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because he saw the accident.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But for me, I would say mine is, I probably have had it happen a handful of times of a complete breakdown over the years, where I felt the stress of all of it, the trauma. Just felt it all in one moment. It hit hard.
Yeah, and as a counselor, I would say I would be worried if that didn't happen, every now and again, that we get just kind of caught up in it, and like you said, a situational type. Now with your oldest son, what kind of things does he deal with that brings forth or triggers that PTSD?
Well, I'll say this. What happened, he went to counseling right after, and he just did not engage at all. He was 12, he was 13, just this weird age for him. And he's always been he's emotional and sensitive, and but he can push it down. Mm-hmm. And he did that for a few years. And what happened was he started acting out, looking for outs and through his teenage years and through high school. He's 21 right now. He went into the Army, which I told him not to, because I told him, I said, please go through counseling first, intensive counseling, before you join the military. But he went ahead and did it. And
so he must not have an official diagnosis of PTSD then.
At that time, he did not.
Gotcha.
At that moment, he did not. So went into the military, and this is the good that came out of it. There was somebody who had committed suicide, and it just triggered all of this depression and the PTSD and all of that. And he started getting actual psychiatric help. He was given medication. He was given a diagnosis, and he was given a honorable medical discharge. This was about almost 2 years in. And so he was honorably discharged due to medical reasons. And he is in a healthier place than he's ever been now. He's 21. Like I said, the good that came out of him joining the military, even though, I mean, he would have been a great soldier, but he had never dealt really with the trauma of that day and the pain of that day. And so he's definitely in a better place now. And he gets counseling every so often. I would say for me, I'm super mindful of my mental and emotional health. I really am. I have a counselor that I meet with often when I feel like, what's going on? Why am I not able to process these feelings? Or I think counseling is so good for people, so good, helps give clear perspective. And I need that because I can easily get into my emotions easily. I'm designed that way. I am. We're pretty mindful of it. I feel like obviously we could be better at it, but I feel like we're in a good spot of recognizing that. My husband too, he's able to kind of recognize it even in me.
Right. And one thing I would share here is you said he started having behavioral issues. We need to be mindful, even with adults, particularly in adolescence, but that behaviors are words, and that kids act a certain way because they don't know how to express what they're trying to say. And so as parents, as adults, as leaders, we need to try to listen to what they're doing to understand what they're saying. And when we get to that point, then, you can get to the root of a problem fairly quickly. Everybody knows me. I see a counselor at 2:00 every Thursday. I mean, it's just, everybody knows that's where Brian's going to be at 2:00 on Thursday. And for me, it's just knowing that I have a safe place to say whatever I want to say. And even more so because you say, well, you're married, you can talk to your spouse about that. Well, you forget I'm a preacher. And if the preacher's wife knows something, it's because the preacher told her, and then the preacher's in trouble for telling. And then there are just some things I don't tell her to protect her, from certain things. And it's good to know that on Thursday at 2:00, I can tell somebody how I feel that's not going to judge me, who's not going to run back to the church and say, you'll not believe what he said, to just have that safe place to be you and for you to be very raw and tell whatever it is. The problem comes into play is where, especially in the faith, is that we have way too many people saying, you just need to trust God. You just need to have faith, instead of, yes, I think you should talk to somebody. Yes, I think you should do this. If we look at the example that Jesus made, he had 3 of his closest friends all the time. And he was God. When he, went to the garden, he had them there. And of course, he got a little perturbed that they kept falling asleep, but I'm sure it'd been a long day for them. But we need that structure and that support. And I'm thankful that you were not one of those people, and I shouldn't say it that way, but you weren't in that group that just said, okay, by me doing that, it's just showing God a lack of faith.
I think we're getting better as a culture, a society, to recognize that it is really okay to say, I'm not handling this well, and I need some help. And, I think I'm really grateful for the counselors and the pastors and the friends that I have. Because it's so easy, and I can see it in myself, where I start to isolate. And that is like that red flag to say, maybe something's going on here. If I'm pulling away from my meeting up with my counselors, hanging out with my friends, having community and accountability, that's my go-to though, is to isolate, is to pull away. And so for me, that's a red flag. And typically my husband will say, you just need to go out, go hang out with somebody, go hang out with
Yeah.
some friends. Like I told him the other day, I was like, I've set up a counseling appointment. My counseling appointment's May 6th. I'm ready, and she's not just a 1 hour counselor. She's like, we get 3 hours together.
Yeah.
That's me and her. So I was like, yeah, I need that. I need that right now.
Sure.
So
Yeah, because not all of us can step back and make our world very small and just love our kids and go out and look at nature and do all that kind of stuff to wrangle ourselves back in. Sometimes we just need to say it. And
yeah.
we could be spiritual and say there's power in words, but there really is power in just saying how you feel.
Yeah.
And communicating that to another person. If you're depressed about something and you come to me and you say, I'm depressed, I'm going to ask you why. Why are you depressed? Once you communicate that, sometimes it's not near as bad as what you feel it is.
Mhm.
And a lot of healing comes just in being able to say, this is how I feel.
Yeah.
So the oldest son was diagnosed then with PTSD.
Mhm.
And he's getting treatment. What about your husband? Is he having to see a counselor, or, I mean, he was there kind of, I hate to say, in the trenches when it first happened, but
I think he hasn't really set up counseling appointments, but he has got really good friends. We are really close with the leadership of our church, not just our pastor and his wife, but the executive pastor. And we have, and my husband's on the worship team, so he's really close with some of the worship leaders there. So I would say he surrounds himself with people. He has a really good, solid community of men that he can be real and raw with. But he's just steady. He's super steady. His faith is, I would say, I feel like he has a lot bigger faith than I do. Not that I'm trying to compare or whatever, but he's just, this is it. We dig in, we move forward. I mean, I think where we see the results of the trauma and it kind of comes out sometimes in our marriage, right? And so we're mindful of that and scheduling time for counseling for just us. He hasn't, and he'll get, he hasn't done really a lot of one-on-one outside of the guys he's had. Typically it's like in our marriage or marriage counseling.
right. And, one of the biggest, well, two of the biggest things I think when dealing with any type of trauma or any mental health is community and structure. And just knowing that you have somebody you can go to and say, this is what's going on, and they will listen. And, you had mentioned when you were driving to the hospital that it was almost like you had to be in control of something. And that is a major coping mechanism, but we can do that same thing healthy in structure, that we are controlling what we're doing and be mindful of that. And, it's when we feel like we've lost control that everything starts to tailspin sometimes. So with Elisha, of course, he survived. He had to have multiple surgeries from what I understand. And this happened when he was 12. So how old is he now?
He will be 21 in July.
21 in July. Now, he does not communicate with language.
That's right.
It is a cognitive aphasia of where he can communicate, but not with language. Now, I have seen some of your videos where it maybe not he's trying to talk or trying to communicate with a moan or a grunt, and for he to have been through all that he's been through, I've not seen a video yet of where he wasn't smiling. And his smile is just insanely contagious and invigorating. And so it really does show that he has a positive outlook on things as well, because he's not sitting there not knowing what's going on. I mean,
Right.
he's not in the sense of brain functionality. He knows where he's at. He knows that he's safe. He knows all of these things that he might need, and I'm sure he's learned his own way to communicate to you what his needs are.
Hmm.
If I can ask you just a very raw question,
Yeah.
when we adopted my son, he had a major trauma. He had 2 subdermal hematomas from his father shaking him upside down in a car seat. He had a tib-fib fracture, and he had his heart issue. And when we were considering adoption, I don't know how many people told us, you don't need to adopt him because y'all will eventually have to quit your job to take care of him. Has anybody ever directly or indirectly said that you should have Elisha in a place where he could have 24-hour medical care?
Yes. I think a lot of people want to give their opinions, right, about what's best in circumstances like ours.
Mm-hmm.
My husband did quit his job and stay home with Elisha for several years. And then in the last few years is when he decided, hey, Elisha's in a really good spot. And what I mean by that is he needs a lot. We have to do everything for him, change him, feed him. He's got a Mickey button, so food goes through his Mickey button. But as far as the only type of medical equipment that somebody would need to use with Elisha during the day when we're not there, if we're not there, would be turning on and off his feeding machine. He doesn't take any medications. He's on no medications.
That's amazing in itself.
Yes. When he came home from the hospital, he was on 18 medications that we had to wean him off of, one of them being methadone, because they were pulling him out of, he was so under with the coma.
Right.
And so that was several weeks of gradual, he had to be really gradual.
Wanting to make sure he didn't go into DTs from everything.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest with you, once he started coming off the medications is when we started seeing him wake up more.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's when we started seeing him start smiling and responding and understand, like he understood. But yeah, I think there are people who want to tell you what's best, your family, your child. And I appreciate people's hearts in that. I really do. There's so much grace. I think people are doing it because they love him.
Mm-hmm.
They feel like they know him, right? Because we
Right.
create these videos and we're on social media, but truthfully, we know him. Truthfully, we're in his life more than they ever will be. We're actually seeing more and more healing in his heart and his life, because when we do the therapy or when we work with him, there is so much love in that. And he is more responsive to us with that. So the answer to your question is yes.
Yeah.
People say that.
Everybody loves to give their opinion. And one thing, and you can carry this and if it works, you can say it was your idea. But I try to remind everybody that when it comes to your life, everybody has an opinion, but only you have a vote.
That's right. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you got to vote what your heart tells you to do. So TBI, traumatic brain injury, which is actually a craniocerebral trauma, of where your brain is even more so than what we would see as a concussion, where your brain is literally shook to where there is a actual trauma that takes place. And as you had mentioned, that they had to take off one of his skull plates to relieve pressure. He had several strokes, which is not uncommon with someone who's had a TBI, particularly because your blood is going into this. We've got to clot all this off, and and they don't want to give you any type of blood thinners because you're already bleeding. And,
Yeah.
It's just kind of all of these things come together and it happens. Let me ask you this question. Had he not had the strokes, do they believe that he would have had a more, I don't want to use the word normal, but would he have had more function than he has?
I don't know. We never really went that far in our conversations, but I would say yes, he probably would have. And because the effects of strokes. I mean, he's got a lot of tone issues. You can see a lot of people ask, we call it his little chicken wing, where his left arm is always up,
Mm-hmm.
And we work on that. We work on his tone. The thing is that, and you are in this field, so you understand that the brain can heal itself. And there's more and more research coming out. We actually went to a neurochiropractor 3 summers ago the summer before COVID. And
upper cervical correction.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But then there were strategies for therapy that are newer.
Right.
And the thing is like insurance, in the insurance world, they're still looking at these old therapies,
mm-hmm.
and they're not allowing you to work with these new therapies. And yet it's cost so much money. And we went all the way to Louisiana to find somebody who does the therapy that we were looking at. And they gave us so many strategies in understanding where Elisha is intellectually even. It was remarkable. We sometimes put this little laser on his head and have his head point the laser. What is 2 + 2? And,
mm-hmm.
Point to the pink one, And I mean, he was getting it, but it was also not only for his brain, but to strengthen his neck and, getting him to use his muscles differently.
Right.
And, but the sad part is that insurance is still saying these are the guidelines you have to meet. These are the benchmarks, and they're based on old research and not the newer research. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of improvement in Elisha
mm-hmm.
because of this new research that's
right.
out there with the brain. So there's teaching the brain, either you can, those neural pathways can reconnect or create new ones.
Right.
And so we're just working with him. It's slow. And the brain is it feels like it's the slowest organ to heal.
It is.
It really, and it was Pat Boone. I want to say it might've been Pat Boone's grandson who fell like 30 feet, but it was 12 years later, he started walking again. 12 years. And he had traumatic brain injury.
Right.
And just see how long it took. And yet he started to walk again. I mean, I'm not saying it happens that way, because there's a spectrum with brain injury. Sometimes people have, a stroke and they can bounce right back. And some people might be like Elisha in a coma, and they just pop right back up and they're good. I don't understand that. I don't know it. For the ones that have a slower healing process, it hurts my heart to know that insurance gives up so quick.
Right. And I'm glad to hear that y'all haven't given up, because it would be easy to let depression and anxiety and all of that seep in and just, give up. Now, for someone who suffers a traumatic brain injury that is not as traumatic as Elisha had, there can be some mental health implications that are caused due to a traumatic brain injury. And, those go into anxiety, depression, and some disorders. But anytime that you're working around the brain, you've got to realize, there's a lot that could go wrong. You only use your frontal cortex to make any emotions or decisions. Everything else is mechanics. Do you ever talk about times prior to the accident that he can recall, or that somehow that he remembers those things that happened?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, my dad was such a big part of my kids' lives before that, right before the accident. And probably, because he was so supportive of me during the time when I was divorced. And so he was such a great father figure to my kids. So right after the accident, when he came home, came to the house, Elisha just lit up. Or sometimes I'll ask him, do you remember, you remember John Mark? And John Mark was with him the day of the accident. He doesn't see John Mark anymore at all. And you can see the recognition and understanding in him. So, or if I talk about, remember when we went to the beach with grandma? I mean, he does have some memories. I do have to believe that he doesn't remember the accident. I don't see how he could with all that happened that day. I mean, it was
right. And I would think his brain would suppress that memory anyway.
Yeah. And then after that, he was so drugged up for so long on so many medications. I can't imagine that he remembers maybe even several months, because he was on so many medications. He was in the hospital for 30 days in a coma. Then he was in, where they were down in a rehab facility in Charlotte, pediatric rehab, for 3 more months, where they were trying to figure out how to get those medications working. They almost OD'd him. He went completely under because the medications they gave him more than double what they were supposed to, because the prescription was read wrong. So he's supposed to get 0.05 and they gave him 0.5, and it knocked him out.
Yeah.
So there's just this adjustment of, and then we, went home, and there was no, he was so tired. He was grumpy, just sad and grumpy, because he couldn't do anything. He wasn't really aware or awake. He just seemed tired all the time. So that was a real challenging time, those several months. So I know I don't feel like he would remember any of that.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't think that he would, but once again, if he did, his brain would suppress that to where it wouldn't come forward. Is there ever times where you will find him and he's just crying?
I'll tell you when he cries is sweet movies, anything sweet or sad. If we were watching a movie the other day and the kid was calling for his mom, and he just got teary-eyed. I mean, just so sweet. And worship. Worship will make him almost sob. It's such a sweet moment. I have videos of that, where he'll just get so teary-eyed. It's so touching to watch, The other time, I mean, on the negative side, the only time that he'll cry is if he's in pain. He's never cried just to cry because he's depressed. He will cry if his stomach is hurting. If he wants to get off of it's like an angry cry. If he wants to get off his tilt table, he'll get really angry. He'll start yelling at us get me down from here. And we just have to, that's when we typically shoot a lot of our videos, is when he's in his tilt table, to distract him so that he can, endure a little bit longer.
Right. But it did seem from the story that you told, he was very soft-hearted before the accident. And sometimes a TBI, depending on where it took place, can enhance those emotions and make you feel certain ways. Of course, I know as I've gotten older, I've become more emotional. It just happens that way. And so, I couldn't imagine. I just could not imagine having gone through what you and your family have gone through, and still being there and dealing with it on a daily basis. But I tell people, I have a friend who has Down syndrome, and I have heard people tell her parents, I just don't know how you deal with having to have a 30-year-old Down syndrome person with you all the time. And to them, it's second nature. I mean, that's all they've ever known. But there are things that happen like this that do alter your family life for the rest of however long. But I say, and I firmly believe this, is that the people who go through these things are the people who are made to be able to deal with these things. And that whether it be that through their faith they are able to do that, or whether it be through, support systems, however it may be, that they have been prepared some way to care for that issue or that problem or that individual. And so sometimes we can easily look at ourselves and say, God, why did you do this? When the real answer is, God, why did you trust me enough to allow this to happen to me?
I'll say this. I don't think I'm any more special, right, than anybody else. It hurts my heart when I think of people who are facing struggles and they come to me and they're afraid to tell me because they're like, oh, it's not as bad as yours. I know it's not. And how
I hear that a lot. Yes.
Yeah. And so I don't want people, what they feel, what they face is just as real. It's different.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, it's different, but it is just as real to them as my circumstances to me. And I don't want to minimize that. And it doesn't make me more special because we might have had more trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I want people to feel safe to come to me with their pain and their struggle. And that's really kind of what happens. They feel safe to say, how do you do it?
Mm-hmm.
Because I can't even do this, this, and this. And I can say, listen, I'm not any more special than you, but here's what I understand. Here's what I've learned. And maybe what I'm sharing with you will equip you in some way, or inspire you, or change you, or challenge you in some way. And to help you do this, because you can do it, And I think for those of us who believe in and follow Jesus, we can do this in the power of the Holy Spirit, trusting that God's grace will sustain us and hold us up through it. And so if we can somehow, and this is going back to what you said, if we, how God takes the bad and turns it for good, this is how he does it, because we are able to overcome with our testimony. Like our testimony, telling somebody, this is how I got through it, helps somebody to overcome their circumstance.
Absolutely.
I don't want people to ever compare. And this is something that I really want to encourage people on your podcast. Don't ever compare your circumstance to somebody else's, because your feelings are your feelings and your struggle is your struggle. And it's real to you. Because sometimes that holds us back from getting any help.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Absolutely.
It's not as bad as somebody else.
Right.
No, if you are feeling that, you are struggling with that, you need to talk to somebody to help you navigate it and walk through it.
Absolutely. And what I tell people that come to me and say, well, this is nothing compared to what you've gone through, I say, I don't know what I've done to fool you to make you think that I've got it all together and that I'm, doing this even the way I think it should be done or the right way.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we don't have it all together.
That's so true.
We have to go back to our faith and just be comforted in knowing that we're doing the best that we can do.
Yeah. And I wish people would come live in my house. They can see the real us and see. We might laugh a lot. Sure. We might have a lot of joy at times, but I'm telling you, I'm sure my husband can share some instances where I wasn't really walking very spirit-filled.
I think we've all had those kind of instances. Yeah. So if there was one thing that you could share with our listeners who may be going through anything, what would your one message to them be?
I think I know people have heard this, but this is really true for us. I know that the struggle is real. I know it is, but you can find joy in it. You can. You just have to make the joy choice.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make that joy choice. And when you do, then you're no longer a victim to that circumstance. You're walking a life out just full of joy. And it doesn't mean, because see, joy is not just this feeling. It's like this, it's a fruit of your life, right? It's a fruit of the Spirit. It's not something worked up. It just is there. But in that, so you should have to look at it. Where is the joy in this? And you have to find it. You have to be intentional with that. And I think that if people do that in their struggle, they're not only going to walk out in victory and hope, but people are going to see that and they're going to say, what is it? This is what separates us, right? And I say it in an encouraging way. Like, what is it, Dr. Brian, that you have this life that is flourishing? It's thriving. I know it's not easy what you've gone through. I know it's painful what you and your wife have had to deal with over the years. You're out there still. You're showing the world, you're teaching the world. What is it about you? And it's because you've made the joy choice. And that's what I would encourage people to do, because you can find it.
Mm-hmm.
And it rises up in you when you're intentional to look for it.
Absolutely. As I've said, it doesn't matter who you look at, whether it's the preacher, the homeless man, or even the man in prison for some heinous crime. If you look hard enough, you'll find something good.
Yeah.
But we've got to look for it,
Yeah, because I think about going back real quick to Paul and Silas, right? I mean, how do you sing after being beaten and chained to a wall? How do you do that? How is it that when the door opens to the prison, you're not just thinking about freedom, you're thinking about the heart of the jailer?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get there?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's something that set them apart.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing that will set us apart.
Yeah. 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 And to go along with that story, not only were they there, they weren't in prison the way we think they were in prison. They were literally chained to the inside of a cave.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other remarkable thing about that is that everything that they had gone through that day, it says that they sang hymns and praises, but it says at the midnight hour.
Yeah.
And after all they had been through that day, their focus was still on the joy.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes we just got to sit back and say, look, I've made it. I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
I've made it through today.
Yes.
And feed off of that for tomorrow.
That's so true. It can be the simplest of things. It doesn't have to be overcomplicated.
Absolutely. Well, Robin, thank you again for joining us on Doc Talks and here on Doc Talks DX. And I appreciate you sharing your story with us again. Could you once again tell us where we can find you?
Sure. Yeah. First off, thank you. Thank you for having me. I feel so encouraged.
Well, I appreciate you. Appreciate you doing it.
Yeah. At the Foutz family on TikTok, at the Foutz family on Instagram, at the Foutz family on Facebook. Easy peasy.
All right. We'll, of course, have that in the description of this episode. And I'm Doc Brian. You can find me at thedocbrian.com. And on that, there is a social media links bar, and you can find all of my social media there. Please feel free to follow us here on Patreon and to subscribe to our podcast on all streaming platforms, Doc Talks with Dr. Brian Shepherd. Also, Doc Talks is a part of the Be Frank Network. You can find all of our podcasts there at BeFrankNetwork.com. And we look forward to having you to join us again next time. Again, thank you for listening and have a great day.